Our next speaker is Patrick McCauley, who will be talking about the nonfiction adventure outside the fictional one.
Just as part of the coordination team that put this together, I just want to keep reminding everybody how much those of us who do put it together appreciate the people who really bring the heart and the blood and the soul of this thing to us every year. It always feels a little bit like a miracle or magic at some level that people walk through the door and the whole thing comes off. All right. This piece, my mother is a master quilter, and I'm always fascinated by the way she takes one thing and cuts it apart and puts it and makes it into something else. And so this essay is put together in the structure of a quilt. A long time ago and far away, I attended Wakefield Memorial High School, the public high school in my hometown of Wakefield, Massachusetts. I don't know how many public school kids ever received the kind of remarkable education I received there, but I don't think there are many. I don't know how many kids had a teacher like Miss Lind, but I suspect there are very few. I mean, how many high school students get to discuss Macbeth in a class with someone who would play the role of Lady Macbeth later that evening on stage with the Quantipowered Players? How many would get a taste of that performance right there in the middle of a 10:30 a.m. class? I bet you can see it. There she was in the front of our class of 10 students, coming to life as Lady Macbeth, and just for us. Not one of us took a breath or even blinked while she held the floor. Not one of us has ever since come to associate the word boring with Shakespeare. However, that was not my first interaction with Miss Lind. As a high school freshman, I was literally good at nothing at all. My corrective shoes and asthma made things tough on the sports field. My mild yet undiagnosed dyslexia made academic side of things less than hopeful, and I was completely lost in regard to social and interpersonal acuity. That year, I struggled through freshman English, spelling everything wrong and reading at about 5 to 10 pages an hour. Miss Lind was not my teacher. Miss Lind taught the accelerated kids, the kids who were destined for her AP English class their senior year. Rumor had it that she performed Shakespeare right there in the middle of class. During the last week of classes that freshman year, I was asked to carry some course texts to the English office. Miss Lind was the chair of the department, and she was there to tell me where to stack the books. Miss Lind was a bit intimidating under any circumstances, so as soon as I finished with the books, I made to leave as quickly as I could, but Miss Lind called me back. Patrick, she said, I would like to talk to you about something important. Would you sit down here for a minute? Yes, Miss Lind. How did she know my name? I had absolutely no idea what this could possibly be about. Patrick, in about 30 minutes, all the students from my accelerated freshman English class will be arriving to take the progress exam for the sophomore accelerated English class. No student is guaranteed continued participation in our accelerated program. This exam is their chance to show that they have what it takes to move on to the next level. I suspect they are all a little nervous right now. I was getting a little nervous. What could any of this have to do with me? She sat down across the table from me and looked me straight in the eyes. All of my accelerated students are, of course, aware of this exam. We have been discussing the exam frequently over the last few weeks of the term. However, almost no students outside of that class know anything about it. Are you aware of this exam, Patrick? No, Miss Lind. I mean, how on earth could I have ever been part of any conversation involving this exam? Well, she said, the thing is, the exam is open to any student who would like to take it. You, for example, could remain seated right there in that chair. If you did, you would be handed an exam, one of these exams. And she held up a box of blue exam booklets. The very same exam the rest of them will receive when they arrive here very soon now. There is no risk, Patrick. If you take the exam and things do not go well, nothing of it will appear anywhere on your record. I have to step out for a minute. I would be very pleased indeed to see you sitting there still when I return. Years later, I was in the middle of my third semester in a demanding ceramics engineering program. Against the stern advice of my advisor, I was again taking an English class as I had done every semester prior. The class was called Existential Literature and included readings by Hermann Hesse, Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, Ernest Hemingway, Woolf, Eliot, and many more. My advisor had explained in no uncertain terms that every single minute I spent on this class was as thoughtless a waste of time as late-night infomercials or reruns of Gilligan's Island. I, on the other hand, counted the minutes between each class. In the center of that semester, the professor assigned us Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment and the Brothers Karamazov. They were 700 and 900 pages, respectively. Still reading at 10 pages an hour, I had to spend 8 to 10 hours every day to complete them in time for class discussion. I put almost everything else in my life on hold to do it. The professor took me aside after we had completed the Dostoevsky section of the class to tell me that I had been the only student in the class to have read the material. He then asked me why I had done it. As I recall, I said that I just couldn't imagine not doing it. I just had to. He told me that this was very interesting and that I should think about it a lot. I did. There was a video of J.K. Rowling signing copies of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone during those first months as word had only just begun to spread on playgrounds and after school. The line to meet the author was not yet the phenomenon it would later become, but it was still substantial. One young person stopped to tell Rowling that hers was the first book he had ever been able to read all the way through to the end. There was no mistaking how proud he was. There was also no mistaking how proud she was either. It's really something when that can happen to two people at the same time and in the same conversation. As she signed the book, it seemed to me that her pride evolved, melted into a kind of gratitude. When we talk about fiction, we often keep our eyes trained on the characters in the story. We know that they are fictitious, and yet we have learned that the suspension of our disbelief is the required ticket to enter into a personally powerful or meaningful experience with the narrative. So much of recent criticism and interpretation of fiction has involved a discussion of the cultural context surrounding either the author or the reader of the text. However, I'm interested in looking into the possibility that the act of reading itself can be a non-fiction adventure that happens simultaneously with the adventures playing out within the fictitious story. We have all experienced this, and most of us have thought about it. Just as Harry progresses through the narrative within the Sorcerer's Stone, the young reader mentioned above progresses through the achievement of reading his first full book. Things will never be the same for either of them. One of the most important and impressive achievements of Rowling's Harry Potter series was her ability to raise the age of the intended audience of each novel by one single year. As most here are aware, Rowling created these novels with the intention that they would be accessible to children roughly the same age as Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Just think about the themes and details that exist in the last novel that would have had no place in the earlier ones. For example, the students of Hogwarts and the readers of the novels are introduced to the Grey Lady in the first novel, but it is not until the last chapters of the last novel that we are made aware of the vicious and misogynistic nature of her brutal murder at the hands of her ruthless stalker. Staying true to the need for subtle changes in complexity from one year to the next is no simple task. And yet, if a writer can do it, this technique can offer the opportunity to give voice to the nature of human maturation or individual character progression. This technique also allows room for a certain kind of irony. Adult readers may be able to see or predict things that the young characters and the young readers will miss because of a quite understandable degree of as yet unacquired life experience. But my point here is not to call attention to the adult reader's ability to catch immature and prejudicial overconfidence and 11-year-old Harry's accusations of Snape or the like. What I wish to call attention to is the fact that the child Harry and the child reading about Harry will not be afforded this insight. That which is over the horizon is always beyond my understanding. Let us take a look at one of the most important instances of this within the series. Harry's first use of the sectum sempra curse. Harry is always being warned by Hermione, at least, that a responsible person always considers the worst possible outcome before taking any action. The Harry of the earlier books is constantly jumping to conclusions and taking unconsidered risks. The Harry that emerges on the other side of his near murder of Draco can no longer be considered quite the same person. If we jump ahead to the Deathly Hallows, we will find the scene in which Remus Lupin, who is newly married and expecting a baby, offering to accompany Harry, Ron, and Hermione on their perilous and critical endeavor. In response to this, Harry says, "I think you are feeling a bit of a daredevil," Harry said. "You fancy stepping into Sirius's shoes." "Harry, no," Hermione begged him, and he continued to glare into Lupin's livid face. "I'd never have believed this," Harry said. "The man who taught me to fight Dementors. A coward." This short scene is one of the most profound and important of the entire series. How does Harry know any of this? How does Harry know what neither Remus nor Hermione does? Harry is able to respond to Remus in this last novel because of the changes to his character that occurred in the earlier one. The Harry who cast the sectum sempra curse a year earlier never emerged from the bathroom he cast it in. The Harry who comes away from that bathroom is not the Harry who went in. Staring down at Draco, Harry knows that at a very serious level, the wounds he inflicted were far more serious than he could have addressed, and that Draco would most certainly have died had Professor Snape not arrived in such a timely manner. The Harry that comes out of the bathroom knows what it means to be a reckless coward, and he knows the remorse such people have to learn to live with forever onward. What I wish to emphasize here is that in both of these pivotal scenes, the characters at their center are facing horizons. If we knew the choices that would change us, we would not choose them, or they would not really change us. The choices that change us and the changes we undergo can never be predicted by us. These changes are not the changes at the level of knowledge, after all. They are changes at the level of being. These are the changes to the kind of thing I am, rather than some advance in intellectual understanding. You can understand the entire anthropological history of marriage ceremonies, but it's when someone puts the ring on your finger that you change. And no one knows what that is like until they are on the other side of that horizon. From the point of view of a person who is on the threshold of a profound change, the coming change is, for that person, always a perfect and utter mystery, even if the story is a tale as old as time for those who are watching from the stands. As a result of the mercurial nature of higher education, I was asked recently to teach a class that is new for me. More specifically, I was asked over the summer if I would agree to inherit a class from a professor who's in the process of retiring after a long and remarkable career. In agreeing to run this class, I was also agreeing to teach it as far as I was able in the manner she would have done. At the center of this class is a text written by a priest, Father Boyle, who decided to spend his life working with people who lived in one of the toughest gang neighborhoods in Los Angeles. At one point in the story, one of the young men who the priest has helped to move past the violence and ruthlessness of LA gang life calls Father Boyle at 2:30 in the morning. He calls because he has recently become a new father and is worried that he will not know what to do, having not had a father of his own. He then tells Father Boyle that he does not feel as if he is fatherless because he feels as though he, Father Boyle, has been like a father for him. So this young man has called to ask one question. He asks, "Do you think of me as your son?" To this, Father Boyle replies, "Of course I do. I always have." The young man says, "I thought so. Good night." We are also reading a text by Japanese philosopher and theologian Keiji Nishitani, who writes in the tradition of Heidegger. Nishitani feels that all humans are on a grand universal journey from one state of being to another. We start out as children, innocently and understandably occupying something of a what's in it for me, self-centered orientation. We see and interpret everything through that lens. Some people never move past this base and instinctual survival perspective. People in this first stage of being have almost no ability to understand why anyone would become Father Boyle. According to Nishitani, this first stage is followed by a second stage, the stage where we overthrow the first question for a second question, in which we ask what our own unique contribution will be. The question of what will I get is overthrown for a revolutionary question. What will I give? What am I here for? According to Nishitani, this second, what will I dedicate my one precious life to question, is completely and utterly invisible and unthinkable to the person still under the sway of the first question and the first stage. That's why so many never leave that stage. They fundamentally presuppose that the first stage is the only stage. And yet the transition from the first stage to the second is as fundamental as a Jungian archetype. Most of us, perhaps all of us, are destined to travel for the what is for us an utter incomprehensible destination. If Nishitani is right, then we are all called forth to that which is completely beyond our comprehension by means of some internal, authentic intuition that is also incomprehensible. I suspect every single person in this room really loves books. So many of us love books because we have found ourselves in them. Not the self I have known and have been, but the about to become self that is an utter and unimaginable mystery in an impenetrable future just over the horizon. No person is reducible to the hierarchy of power networks of their cultural context. Even in the most indoctrinated bigot, there resides something of the unconditional uniqueness and individually that casts, from time to time, an offhand glance at the horizon and knows, for a second or two, what Luke Skywalker feels as he stares off into the sunset, yearning for who knows what that lies beyond Uncle Owen's farm. Dorothy does too. I really love the fact that English classes have evolved past the old white man's club that I was introduced to in the late 1970s. My master's degree in literary theory testifies to this. However, I'm also the kid who hid the fact that I was reading The Lord of the Rings from all my middle school friends. Reading at my regular rate, it took me longer to read the books than it took Frodo to travel to Mordor and back. I'm not kidding. However, after I closed the last cover, I had by then turned into somebody else. The possibility of a random life of happenstance had just disappeared. Almost every teacher I know wants to reveal this aspect of literature to their students. Most of them became teachers to do that. I think we should do that. English departments have to return to the call for epic hope and optimistic, eudaimonic self-image through literature and education. When we sit down to construct curriculum and syllabi, I think we must start with the most basic question. What do our students, the students who are really sitting there, what do those students need from books? They need books that allow them to see themselves from a new angle. They need a book that grabs them in a way that they feel irrevocably called to peer at the horizon and wonder what's over there. Shakespeare was once the hottest ticket in town, not a regretted homework assignment. My primary interest in Harry Potter is that my own students lined up around the block to get the next book. My students came to me begging me to use it in class. They could really see themselves in the characters of the story, and they could catch a precious, sparkling, magical glimpse over the horizon to who they were being called to be. We can't teach people what to become, and we certainly can't teach them what to become by telling them what we don't want them to be. The only magic powerful enough for that is pure, authentic, subjective intuition and inspiration. Art, narrative, symbol, these are the only spells with the power to move things forward because change only seems to happen in groups. In reality, change, progress, only happens one person at a time, listening in the twilight to that thin, small voice of possible personal fulfillment and purpose. Thank you.